Okay, then let's start with my little introduction to the presentation of John Komlos. But first of all, I would like to say, to ask, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I take this as given. And first of all, I would like to say that I'm very thankful and pleased to see so many friends and colleagues of mine of earlier times. And particularly, I'm pleased to see Gerlinde Zinn and John Komlos. And it is now the presentation of John Komlos, which I would like to introduce shortly. And I would like to start with saying it is a special pleasure for me to introduce today's presentation of Professor Komlos. And the first reason for this is my connection to the history section of the economics department of Munich University. During my studies of economics, I learned a lot from John Komlos' predecessor, Knut Borchert, who also was important for my diploma and doctorate. I share with John Komlos the idea that quantitativeness is important also in economic history. More generally, John Komlos stands for the research field Economics and Human Biology, which is also the title of a journal he has founded nearly 20 years ago. Contrary to what one might expect from an historian, John Komlos has never only looked back. Particularly, his recent research is concerned with urgent, actual questions. In a recent paper about the US economy, he lists not less than 20 major challenges of an economic, cultural, and political nature. He compares the severity and interconnectedness of these challenges with the famous Gordian knot. Unfortunately, and Alexander the Great is not in sight, as John Komlos is convinced. The topic of his presentation today is again very much actual, and I presume will include an assessment of the future way of the US economy. So we are eagerly looking forward to the actual headwinds in the US economy after COVID. Thank you very much for listening to my little introduction, and we are all glad to hear now to the presentation of Professor Komlos.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be back in Munich among old friends and colleagues. Unfortunately, my topic today is not very uplifting, but it cannot be held. The beginning of my lecture is historical because I want you to understand how we got here. And I'm an economic historian to begin with, so it's kind of natural for me to describe in a few words the situation up to today. And the concept I'm using is path dependence. I begin with Reagan because I believe that Reaganomics was a watershed moment in the history of the US economy, a movement away from the New Deal and the consensus that one has to be concerned about the bottom half of the income distribution. Okay, so it's five administrations. After Reaganomics came hyperglobalization, which created a lot of havoc. Then came the financial crisis, which was wasted, and finally we ended up with the revolt of the deplorables. So that's basically the beginning of my talk. It concentrates on a summation of despair. A lot of people, maybe 10%, 20% of the population that developed a lot of anxiety. And the problem began with the across-the-board tax cuts, which added $400,000 to the disposable income of the millionaires. Now, that was a game changer because they could use that $400,000 in order to create the institutions that would help them gain even more income. Trickle down economics didn't work a lot. Practically nothing trickled down, and instead we got endemic budget deficits that are still with us, endemic current account deficits, and it created a lot of inequality. You can see it on this Gini coefficient curve. There is a kink in 1981, and I could show you 5 more curves like that that show a kink. The kink is important. It emphasizes the watershed moment. Now, we were in a recession, to be sure, when Reagan took over, and Reaganomics did bring us out of the recession, but it didn't create a new economy, except it brought us back to potential. Okay, so it was not an economic, it wasn't a Wirtschaftswunder. It brought us back to potential, which is a good thing, no doubt, but it wasn't a new kind of an economy. And then came hyperglobalization, which destroyed America's industrial heartland and created a downward social mobility, which is very difficult to accept for a lot of people, created a lot of despair. Clinton also continued with deregulation, so he really continued Reagan's legacy in a way. And well, there's a good way to destroy an industry, and there is a bad way to destroy industry. Clinton claimed that NAFTA would create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and he got the Pinocchio for that from me because he forgot about the Stolper-Samuelson theorem. Okay, and well, of course, it did create a lot of wealth. You know, this is Apple's headquarters. It did create a lot of wealth. There's no doubt about it. Microsoft looks beautiful. Not sure what with this, maybe Google, I'm not sure, but it just shows you that it did create a lot of wealth. And the Walmart siblings got a pretty good deal out of it. But the problem is that it was not Pareto optimal. Okay, and that is missing in Mankiw's textbook, and that created a lot of problems, which we'll come back to. And then came the financial crisis, and we know, and Barack Obama promised a lot of change, as you might remember, but he let 8 million people be evicted, okay, which again added to the despair and added to the injustice of the socioeconomic system, because the CEOs were not evicted. From the 1%, the CEOs remained in the 1%, and that also created a lot of anxiety. Now, Obama appointed the old guard. There was no new faces in his economic team, and that meant that it wasn't going to be particularly reformist. There was one paper that came out of the Boston Fed that said, let's save the homeowners also, but it didn't go very far, and it wouldn't have cost a lot of money. Today, I think there are a lot of people, Paul Starr being another one, who recognizes that Obama wasted the crisis for the very simple reason that the US economy cannot possibly be reformed in normal times. You know, only if we're in a crisis. That's the major background assumption here. And here's another article saying the same thing. Wasted Crisis. A book came out in 2019 about it. The same thing can be said today, by the way, that Biden's 1.9 trillion package was hailed as a big game changer, but there's nothing permanent in there. There's nothing that would change the economic system. So that if he had, for example, began to tax the super rich so that they paid for part of the 1.9 trillion, that would have been a game changer. Okay, so Obama wasted that. So we had 5 administrations which made mistakes of historical proportions. You have to go back to the Bourbons of 1789 or the Tsarist Russia of 2017 to see mistakes of these proportions, because of the despair that accumulated in various pockets of the society. And the result was Trumpism in 2016, which I consider as a revolution. Let's call it a revolution because it really aimed to throw out the elite, the political elite, the intellectual elite, and that's what the revolutions are all about, really. Okay. The establishment, throwing out the establishment. Okay. So it's voodoo economics, a term which Bush Sr. coined, paved the way to Trumpism. Okay. Now in 2019, 2020, Trump claimed that this was the best economy ever. Okay, but I think he mistook a Potemkin village for reality. And that's what I'm about to show, that we are faced with a Gordian knot. Alexander the Great is not in sight. And what are the problems? Okay, but I'm assuming that we're going to come over the current pandemic. I'm assuming that we're going to be able to do that much. But even then, my argument is that Biden is facing 23 headwinds. And these headwinds are very, very strong, and he will be able to fix none of them. Okay, so a country like Germany better take that into consideration. As far as I'm concerned, the number one problem is the US Constitution, which is anachronistic, led to a dysfunctional government, and the general will of the population cannot become reality. The role of a constitution, the role of democracy, is to make the general will into a workable political system. Okay, but when Al Gore beat Bush Jr. and he didn't become president, you know that there is a problem in the way the system is set up. Hillary Clinton beat Trump pretty badly, and yet she did not become president. So you know that we got a problem. When small states like Wyoming have twice, the voters in these states have twice the importance of voters in California for the Senate, you know we got a problem. Okay, so that's the number one problem. Number two, well, you got a lot of money in politics, and that's a problem, because the Supreme Court determined that money is speech. Well, good luck with that. It certainly adds to the power imbalance, an imbalance that was already bad because of the various policies I alluded to earlier, and the US morphs into a plutocracy. Okay, forget about democracy anymore. And there's a lot of articles on that, and you can read on that from this book, Page and Gillen. It's very clear about it. The will of the people cannot become reality. Then you might as well forget about democracy. That's what Jean-Jacques Rousseau would argue in his social contract. Okay, so that's a problem. Wealth distribution is unbelievable, really. The top 1% of the US population has an average wealth of $25 million. Think about that. The bottom half of the population has an average wealth of $20,000, which is an automobile, basically. Okay, and that's not going to work for very long. Now, this is the balance of power in the 1950s, depended on big labor, government, and big business kind of balancing each other out in this kind of a triangle. But when you take away big labor, you don't have a balance anymore. And what you have is big business that got a lot of money. You have politicians who need that money, and you have a quid pro quo, where they exchange deregulation for money. So that's how we became a plutocracy. It's a sad story, but we might as well take that into consideration, because political power in the US, at least, depends on money. Okay, Adam Smith knew that wealth is money. That's in the Wealth of Nations. Okay, and one thing we forgot is that the role of government is to maintain the balance of power. One of the more important roles of government is to maintain the balance of power. Democracy is predicated on the dispersion of power, right? So without that countervailing power, you have a problem. And you have another issue here, because if you have enough money, you can manipulate the ideology, which the super rich did in a big way through think tanks and through the media, so that many poor people even do not recognize their own self-interest. Big problem in a democracy. Third headway is obviously the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower spoke about this in 1961. Very important, because it takes a lot of money, obviously. It takes a lot of money away from domestic expenditures, the Iraq War, the Afghan War, and an annual expenditure of $720 billion. It's more than 3% of GNP. Good luck with an economy like that, okay? Dominant ideology, as I just mentioned, is a problem, because the wisdom of the market is overestimated, and that has seeped into popular culture. Very difficult to change, hard to impress the average voter to recognize their own self-interest, because obviously globalization is very complex. They don't know about Pareto optimality, so on, so on and so forth. They don't know what hit them. Okay, the deplorables do not know what hit them. So it's important to realize that the market is not a morally neutral instrument for defining the common good. Very important statement. I didn't come up with it, but it's worth repeating, okay? Because it's not morally neutral. It brings about certain outcomes, and we have to judge whether those outcomes are acceptable to us or not. especially in a U.S. economy that has a history of slavery, very difficult to come by. It's another other headwind. The descendants of slaves are still at the bottom of the totem pole. Okay, and here I'm not talking about skin color. I'm not talking about African Americans. I'm talking about the descendants of slaves. Very important. Obama was not a descendant of slave. Our current vice president is not a descendant of slaves. Very important. Okay, because unfortunately minorities are overrepresented in a big way among the poor. African Americans have $25,000 less income annually than whites. Obviously, that's going to present a problem. This is the, excuse me, this is the murder of Eric Garner, goes back to 2014. I'm going to show it to you because it must be unbelievable. You might have forgotten that it's very similar to George Floyd. I don't know if you can hear this, but they take him down. They basically kill him. He's saying, I don't know if you can hear it, but he's saying I can't beat. He was selling cigarettes, okay, at retail. He wasn't supposed to be selling cigarettes. So it's a problem, especially since unemployment rate among blacks is pretty high, about twice as what it is among whites. I use the U6 rate in case you want to look that up as the true unemployment rate, not the official unemployment rate, which is U3. You can see the COVID upswing here, but even before COVID, let's say in November of 2016, when Trump was elected, the unemployment rate among whites was even about 7 or 8%. Okay, so it gives you an idea of the problems. No high school diploma meant for blacks, like for Eric Gardner or George Floyd, 32% unemployment rate. You don't find that in the newspapers. You don't find that in the media. High school graduates, even among whites, 10%. This is at the time of Trump's election. Okay, so no wonder Trump said that I love the uneducated. Okay, that's going to come up later on again. Prisons are not very nice to descendants of American slavery. We have an unjust economy, number 6, and that's a problem because justice is just as important for humans as efficiency, for example. A lot of very important. And if you ask Americans, their subjective evaluation is that it works for half of the population. Half of the population is thriving, and this is pretty steady. And about 44% say that they're basically struggling. They're getting in there. They have a hard time paying for the electric bill, but they're keeping head above water, basically. Not a economy, a $23 trillion economy that delivers a good life to almost the whole population. Of course, Tim Cook is doing well, but that's not enough. And here is Alan Greenspan, who is not a revolutionary, as you well know, saying something very important about inequality.
The reason I say it's crucially important that you cannot have the benefits of capitalist market growth without the support of a significant proportion, and indeed virtually all of the people. And if you have an increasing sense that the rewards of capitalism are being distributed unjustly, the system will not stand.
Well, that's a big words. Okay, he says the system will not stand. He's talking in 2007. Well, the system is not standing. Okay, the system is not standing. Okay, well, distribution. The top 1% has about a third of total wealth. Bottom 50% has this sliver. Okay, that's why the system is not standing. Okay, 78% of workers live paycheck to paycheck. 40% of adults did not have $400 in the bank to cover an unexpected expense. Think about that. Okay. Number 7, educational system is catastrophic. Incredibly inefficient, incredible waste of human resources. An economy cannot possibly be in the forefront with that kind of an educational system. And of course, the universities are very expensive. Keeps a lot of important people out of the educational system, which then leads to a shortage of skilled labor. Okay, that's why Microsoft has 1/4 of its labor force imported. Okay, problem. Life expectancy is a problem. It was falling even before the pandemic. About 150,000 people kill themselves annually, according to Angus Deaton and his wife, Ann Case, who just wrote a book about that. It's a very important reflection of problems in the society. So demography is important to me. In fact, an article came out last year in the American Economic Review Insights, which argued that the trade liberalization of 2000 actually created a lot of mortality in the U.S. So globalization also kills people in a big way. Here's the life expectancy. You see, it was even coming down, making a little bit of a comeback, and now it's fallen by a whole year. Not a good sign. Here is alcohol poisoning, drug and alcohol poisoning among 50-year-olds. You can see the kink again, right around 2000. Again, very ominous. Germany is down here. It didn't have any increase at all. Affects all ages, but only if you didn't go to college. Okay, a high school degree or less. That's what's increasing. So that makes a big difference. Number 9. Anemic GDP growth is the new normal. I mean, we have to come to terms with that. In fact, Larry Summers has been writing a lot about that. Per capita growth has been about 1% lower in the 20th century than it was in the 21st century than it was in the 20th century. A whole percentage. Okay, and here's a graph of that. We need to come to terms with it. In fact, if you extrapolate the growth since the 1980s, you see a big hole here after the financial crisis, which is about $1 trillion or more. We are far away from our potential. In other words, in this perspective, Reagan's ability to jump back to potential begins to look a lot better. Okay, we're not even doing that these days. Productivity slowed down. Okay, this is pretty well known. This implies that we cannot rely on innovation or entrepreneurship. They're no longer going to be the engines of growth. Okay, productivity just about half, from about 1% per annum to about 0.5% per annum. 11, budget deficits, which started under Reagan, as I told you. Which also means there's no money for major projects. There's no money for education, no money for infrastructure, and so forth, and so on. And the interest rate in 2018 on the debt was 2.3%. But what happens if it goes higher than that? Okay, the public debt reached from 100% to 135% during the crisis. So it's really reaching problematic proportions. Okay, in 2020, we added $3 trillion to the debt. Think about that. In other words, it's not an economy that's in balance. It's got to be, it's being held up by deficits. And in fact, the deficits in 2018 dollars started under Reagan in a big way, as you can see here, and continued unabated until the financial crisis, when it went really south. And of course, now it's even further than that. You can see it on this graph. It's $3 trillion in 2020. Not a pleasant place to be. This is the deficit as a percent of gross domestic product. Here in 2020 reached 15% deficit. This is not what Keynes had in mind, I don't think. Okay. So there we are. This is the accumulated debt. Went from 30% to 60% under Bush Sr., then kind of lingered at that level until the financial crisis, and then it jumped to 100%, and now it's way out of line. Here you can see the debt during the Corona crisis. Okay. So that's a problem, because we're leaving future generations with debt that they're not going to be very happy with. Somebody got their speaker on.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think this is pretty much unsustainable. Number 12, private debt is also problematic. Okay, the student debt is $1.6 trillion. That's when you leave college, right? Not a good foundations for a consumer society. These are not going to be folks who are going to be able to buy houses or get a family going or anything of that sort. Credit card debt is also a problem. That implies that aggregate demand is going to be subdued for some time to come. Household debt grew at a rate of 4.2% per annum. Number 13, technological unemployment is a problem because of the skills mismatch, which means that the schools are not providing enough workers who can work the robots, who can deal with artificial intelligence, and instead you have a gig economy with precarious jobs, And we have to think for the future how to deal with this. We want a job guarantee, you want a basic income, we want to tax robots. All this will have to be discussed. Number 14, the endemic unemployment rate is a problem. Don't listen to the official rate. The official rate is cooked. Okay, there's a recipe for that. During the COVID, the unemployment rate jumped to 24%. And the inflation rate, I believe, I can't prove it, but I believe it's also cooked. It's also a problem. Here is the official unemployment rate, and here is U6, what I call the true unemployment rate, was about 7.5% even before COVID, jumped to about 23% right here, but it came down afterwards to some degree. A big problem, number 15, is stagnating or declining wages. Okay, because it creates distributional conflicts, fuels white nationalism, and populism and Trumpism and all that. A very big problem. Here's the real wages of men after taxes in 2018 dollars. These are high school graduates, no college. Very big problem. No change for all this time between 1975 and 2018. It's an incredible development. The U.S. Never had anything like this before. And of course, that builds up the anxiety and disaffection. Those without the high school diploma are also in difficult situations. And it has to some degree, come back to the fact that productivity rose faster than wages and compensation. Okay, so there's a big gap here. And that also started in a big way in 1981. Okay, there's a little bit of a wedge here already, but it really began with Reagan. Problematic disaffection. Under Reagan, the minimum wage came down and way down and stayed down at $7.25 today. Number 16, healthcare system is very inefficient. It's extremely costly. It costs about twice as much as the European system and provides 2 years less life. So there's no other way of referring to this as an incredible waste of human resources. And that means the population is in poor health. That's one of the reasons why COVID was so devastating in the US. Poor health, 1/3 of the population is obese. They were obviously more at risk of COVID, and lowers productivity and takes a big chunk out of GDP, 17%. That means that other sectors of the economy are not going to be thriving as much as they could otherwise. Hyperglobalization, I referred to this earlier, but the trade deficit is about $1 trillion per annum. That exports a lot of jobs, and we continue to export a lot of jobs. And we basically spent about $16 trillion abroad. That's going to be problematic for the U.S. Balance of trade already under Reagan, as you can see here, and just became endemic. And that meant that in many places, real median household income, for example, in Michigan, even in 2019, was way down. Okay, these guys are not going to be happy citizens. These are the people who voted for Trump after all in 2016. Wisconsin still down in 2019. No wonder they voted for Trump. Actually, there's a paper that came out in 2020 in the American Economic Review saying that we imported political polarization, namely that if the imports had been cut by just a half, Hillary would have won in 2016. Okay, so trade exposure creates a lot of havoc. Number 18, infrastructure is a problem. As I said before, no money for repairs, and the infrastructure is the lifeblood of the economy. Without that, the economy is not going to be working, right? Bailout capitalism is what we've become. I call it Rettungskapitalismus in German. The economy is being propped up by money creation. It started with Bernanke, remember, quantitative easing. We had the Federal Reserve had about less than $1 trillion worth of assets, went up to 2 trillion almost overnight, and then we had quantitative easing through until we ended up with almost $4.5 trillion. Notice that QE2 and QE3 do not have any impact here on GNP per capita. Okay, no impact. That's important. And in today's world, 2020, the Federal Reserve increased the assets from $4 trillion to $7 trillion by $3 trillion in a matter of months. Of course, it stopped the free fall in the industrial index, in the stock market index, and it came back up, but it created an incredible, or maintained an incredible bubble. Okay, so that's not the makings of a stable economy. Here's the picture from the financial crisis to today. An increase in assets by a factor of 9. Number 20, well, the outcome is an unbalanced economy. It just doesn't add up. That's where the Gordian knot comes in. The financial sector works well, but it's like a cocoon. It doesn't really have an impact on the real economy. The tech sector is doing well, but it needs workers and doesn't get them because the school system doesn't deliver. It's a permanent state of disequilibrium. And on top of it, we're living beyond our means. We, the American people, are living beyond our means by a lot, and addicted to it, basically, and addicted to it. Okay, a lot of rent seeking on Wall Street. We know about that. 21, we got to be thinking about black swans, because these are important and become more important in the 21st century. These are low probability, large impact events that Nassim Taleb wrote about and advocated a black swan robust society, which we are obviously not. Okay, because we were not prepared for COVID by a long shot. And we're not prepared for the other black swans that are lurking around the corner. Okay, number 22, we depend a lot on the Chinese Politburo because they bought up a lot of our debt, and that's risky because it's an adversary, obviously. Who knows what they have in mind? 23, this is the final one on this list. but it's still important. Namely, we got a new normal, we got a new economy, we got a new epoch, okay, that we have not really understood, just as we did not understand the Great Depression until Keynes came along. Okay, what is it? Well, it's a transformation. We're living through a transformative time from an industrial society to a society that is based on knowledge, information society, that sort of thing. And these kinds of transformations have always been problematic in a historical context. Think of the problems of the transformation from feudalism to capitalism. Think of the problems of going from an agricultural society to an industrial society. That's our problem today, in a sense, and we're not have not come to terms with it. We don't have a new Keynes for our times, okay? And that means that Biden has this heavy burden, and nirvana is not within our reach, okay? And my prediction is that the chaos is going to continue. We are in a sackgasse, and that means we are in an uncharted territory. And you can read more about it in my book, which advocates an economy with a human face, an economy that can solve these problems. Okay, well, that's it. Thank you for your attention. And I'm ready to take some questions. I don't know if I'll be able to answer them, but I'll listen to them at least.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So